probably one of the most nimble bikes, and probably the bike that I hear everyone want to be brought back the most. This is the 2021 Harley-Davidson Iron 1200 for your pre-owned bike of the week. The traditional, or I guess the previous, Harley-Davidson Sportster. It's rocking that 1200cc evolution motor, and it's just 1200 cc's of a good time. The Sportsters, they were, power to weight is kind of their thing. They didn't have a ton of power, but they were a lot smaller. And look how slender they are, too. Very narrow bike, very sporty with the exposed rear shocks, and still classic Harley. It was one of the last Harleys to rock, just straight oil, or just straight air cooling. They didn't even have an oil cooler. It was just straight 1200 cc's and using those fins for cooling. And it's a cool bike. Lots of advantages to this bike. I believe these originally had mids on them, but it looks like this one is pre-owned, so it does have Fords on it and a couple other little features. It's also one of the last bikes to still use a physical key. This one is in the denim and has that nice little green accents on the tank. Fire right up. So, you'll see it's got a analog speedometer right there. Very simple bike. Looks like it's got wireless charging too. Does this work on my phone? What? No way. That's cool. You like that picture? Is this charging? That is charging. Okay, so that's cool. I'm sold. Cool charger. Very simple controls, as you'll see. Not much to it. This one does have a little bag down here. You can throw some stuff in if you need to. This is motorcycle. Very simple. I've got a little luggage rack, strap some stuff to, and it looks like it is quick detach if you want to keep the bike looking a little more clean and slender. Stock exhaust looks like just straight 2-to-2 system going on. Here it is, nothing too fancy, just a Harley-Davidson motorcycle ready to rock and roll. So, let's do what it wants to do and roll. Yeah, feel very forward on this. I like it. This thing's clean. Looks like it only has just over 2,500 miles, and it looks good. Looks very clean. Braking's not too bad. Oh, it's a RPD truck. How about it? Oh yeah, some LED lights all around on this thing. Little upgrade there. Yeah, so when these bikes were running around, I want to say this was the last year of the Iron 2, 21, because I think in 22, the last bikes we saw were the, I think the only 1200 you had was the 48. And then I think 2022 was that last year that we saw the Sportsters before everything being on the Rev Max platform now. So now let's talk OG Sportster, like the Iron 1200 versus the new Nightster. So, ooh, that's a lot of sun. That's what everyone really wants to know. Because now with the advertised MSRP on the Nightsters, and that's the base Nightster. So again, it doesn't have many more controls than this, but you get that 975 platform of a bike that's ready to rock. So 1200cc, air-cooled, super simple bike. Very not much to it. Nightster 975 might be a little bit lighter, but it's gonna feel lighter for sure, because both are gonna have a pretty similar fuel tank size, but the one on the Nightster is actually gonna be below the seat, so you will have to get off at every gas stop, but all right. It's not the end of the world there. That was one of the big complaints people had with the Harley-Davidson Sportsters, were, yes, they were very light, but they were also very top-heavy. So when you were, a newer rider trying things out, they were forgiving because they were lighter, but not as forgiving as they could be because they were so top-heavy. So if you got into a bit of a bind, slammed on the brakes with the handlebars turned, it'd be a little bit harder to catch that weight and keep it upright. But now they're even more new rider friendly because of that lower center of gravity. So pretty neat. And I really want to crank on this thing, but it's hard to with old Nissan right here. How he's going for it. All right. So are we. All right. She got a little more pep than I thought. All right. A couple riders. One rider in particular I know. And they strongly believe that, you don't need anything more than this right here, the Sportster. A bit of a motorcycling purist. Something light. You want to go camping, ride around the campsite. You got something nice and light, easy to handle. But out long stretches on the highway, it'll do it. Yeah, a nice big road glide is great, but you can do a lot of riding with a little bike like this. They're just simple and fun. If you have an issue with them, the mechanics on it are pretty simple, so you can usually get most of your issues worked out pretty quick. These are, dare I say, bulletproof, but this platform is tough. They can take a beating, that's for sure. But one of my absolute favorite features of this bike, besides how light and nimble it is, how much fun it is to go ride around, absolute favorite feature when it comes to the mechanics of this bike, and if you're wrenching on it or working on it yourself, is the belt location. On the Harley-Davidson, on most of the Harleys, Softails, Dynas, Baggers, they have a pretty big primary drive that's going to be on the left side. So whereas the Sportster, it's pretty small. Not a whole lot going into it. Doesn't stick out very far, which is a nice feature in itself. So it keeps the profile a little bit slimmer. But nice big feature of that, or a reason it could do that, is because the belt is actually on the right side with the exhaust. So all that to say is, if you were to put so many miles on your bike that it's time to replace the belt, or you get a rock that shreds the belt, or maybe you do a lot of clutch dumps and just wore the belt out, it's a little bit easier to replace on this bike, because you won't have to pull as much off doing that, whereas on your M8s, pretty much all your M8s, you have to pull that whole primary off to access the belt. So it's a lot more labor-intensive job. Now, whoa, got the roller skates. Check that out. My man, crushing it. That's an advantage there, is that, then you're not on the side of the road trying to pull your whole primary off trying to replace that belt. But on the other hand, you're not super likely to be in that situation. Because belts, they hold up great. I think I've got 60,000 miles on my belt right now on my Softail, and they haven't been the easiest 60K either. Super unlikely, or it's not super likely to have to be in that situation of being on the side of the road, because you're also going to have to get another belt. So either way, you'll probably be going to have to go to a dealer or go somewhere to get that part, because chances are you're not carrying an extra belt with you. Whereas a chain, that now we're starting to get into that debate of chain versus belt, and they each have their advantages and disadvantages. From what I've seen of long miles of riding and putting a lot of miles on it, I think there's just something nice about the mentality of riding with the Harley, that you're not as concerned of checking the chain all the time. With the belt, it's really a lot of kind of set it and forget it. If you're looking at a bike like a touring bike that you're putting a lot of miles on, then the belts just make it so nice, because there's not the extra maintenance involved with the chain. The big advantage of the chain is they do handle that. If you have big power, they're going to handle that better, obviously. And then replacing they'll be a little bit easier to replace. You know, if you have a link break, because then, you know, you just swap the link out usually. But if you have, but you're going to be replacing a chain a lot more than a belt, most likely, just with the lifespan of each. But all that to say, I like the Sportster because it's easy to replace the belt. So it just kind of is a nice little thing to think about. You know, if I'm looking at a bike that I want just super simple, not much tech, very basic, you know, then I lean towards that Sportster. You know, if I had a bike that had a ton of tech on it, like a Road Glide, like a new Road Glide or a new Pan Am, it'd be great knowing that I have a bike that has all of this tech and can handle everything phenomenally. But, you know, for your little weekend or little day trip cruising, you want something a little bit simpler, you know, a little old Sportster with this minimal setup. There's just something nice and refreshing about it too sometimes. Now, a couple big things to do to these bikes right out the gate is that second pipe for the exhaust. I guess maybe it's the first pipe, the bottom pipe, not the top pipe, obviously. The bottom pipe is going to scrape pretty quick, so you can get a decent amount of lean. Just an exhaust that sits up, maybe like a 2-in-1 setup that's a little bit taller. You can squeeze a little bit more lean out of that bike. Because I know that was kind of an issue with a lot of the 48s I saw. The 48s sat pretty low. And downside of them is, you know, they look super cool. But a lot of people complained about that like 2.2 gallon tank. I mean, it's not a whole lot of range. You know, the 1200 here, you do get that 3 gallon, which on a bike this small, it's nice. It's nice to come off the bike, you know, after that long, maybe 120, 150 miles, depending on how you're riding. Probably like 120. Can't remember what kind of range I was getting on mine. But the bars are great. I think these are the stock bars, and they're just in such a good little spot. Yeah, you can do T-bars, but nice advantage to this is these are still pretty stiff, but with that speedometer, it's nice to have it down low where it's at the right angle, aiming at you. If you do a super tall riser, then sometimes it puts that in a bit of a weird spot. See, these things get down and they've got torque. You know, that's something a lot of these smaller bikes don't have, is that torque to really pull you right out of that corner. So these things are just so much. New riders, old riders, riders that don't want a heavy bike. I mean, there's just so much you can do with the Sportster. But you got to be careful now, though, because a lot of folks are buying up the old Sportsters, making choppers out of them. But this 2021, it's nice and nimble as it is. I'd be surprised to see it chopped up here soon. You can make a cool, like a high and tight chop, you know, because as narrow as that tree is, and these forks are. Maybe lift the tank up, tighten up the bars a little bit, tighten up the rear of the bike. You can have a real cool, like, little skinny chop. Put your feet up on the peg, on the motor. It's a cool bike. And as long as the Sportsters have been around, and as little as they've changed, there is so many aftermarket accessories for these bikes. There's so much you can do to these bikes. And a lot of the parts fit each other. So that's really cool. If you're trying to customize a bike, the Sportster, dare I say, it's the most customizable Harley. I feel like I've said that about a Harley before, and I feel like it was about the Sportster. Just because the Sportster hasn't really gone through that many changes in the 50 years it's been around. Buddy, don't stop back there. You gotta get on the sensor. Why'd you stop 300 feet back? The old move you gotta do sometimes. Let folks know, like, hey, could you please scooch up just a little bit so we can make this light change. So I'd rather not sit here this entire time. Now, another one disadvantage to this bike is that it does not have a fuel gauge. So all you're going to have, for the most part, is going to be your fuel light. But this is a 21, so besides your mileage, if you flip through things up here, you can see this bike does have a trip A, a trip B, a clock. Ooh. You do have your gear and RPM, which is really nice. And then your miles. So unfortunately on this one, you don't get that fuel range either. You're only going to get the fuel light, and you'll have to rely on resetting your mileage for the most part. Do things the old school way. So that's probably the biggest disadvantage of these bikes. But with only a 3-gallon tank, you can pretty much just assume you need gas most of the time. So you get pretty good at knowing what you need. So, and the fuel light gives you a pretty decent range, so you know it's not going to be like, hey, you need gas in 2 miles. It'll give you usually a good enough heads up to get to a station nearby. So thank you guys for riding along with us. I hope you learned a little bit about the Harley-Davidson Sportster, and hopefully you want to come check this one out here at Tobacco Road Harley-Davidson. So appreciate you guys for riding along with us. And if you want to know more about this bike or any of the other awesome rides here at Tobacco Road Harley-Davidson in Raleigh, North Carolina, then be sure to come see us. In the meantime, ride safe, and we hope to see you soon.